When I saw her face on that old adoption record, I thought the system had made a mistake because I was staring at my own reflection. I've lived my entire life believing I was an only child. My parents, God rest their souls, never once hinted otherwise. I grew up in a quiet house just outside Charleston, South Carolina, a place where secrets, if they existed, seemed to hide behind lace curtains and polite smiles. I was 36 when the truth began to unravel. At that point in my life, I thought I had everything figured out. I worked as a nurse in a small private clinic, married to a man named Daniel, charming, dependable, the kind of man who brought flowers on random Tuesdays and still called me his girl, even after a decade of marriage. We didn't have children, but we had plans. A little house near the water, 2 old golden retrievers, and a porch swing that creaked whenever the wind caught it just right. We were steady, predictable, safe, or so I thought. The day everything shifted started like any other ordinary Wednesday. I was cleaning out my mother's attic, trying to make space before we sold the house. Dust clung to the air like fog, and each box I opened felt like unlocking another piece of her quiet, private world. That's when I found the folder. It was buried beneath old tax forms and yellowed recipe cards, a slim manila file labeled Adoption 1987. At first, I assumed it was someone else's paperwork, maybe something from her old church charity work, but when I opened it, my breath caught. There was a birth certificate. My birth certificate. Only, it didn't say 1 baby, it said 2, twin female infants. I remember sitting down on the floor right there in the attic, heart pounding, as dust danced in the sunlight streaming through the window. I reread it again and again, tracing the lines with my trembling fingers. My name, Emma Grace Morgan, and next to it, Ella Rose. I whispered the name like it belonged to a ghost. I couldn't wrap my head around it. My mother had never once mentioned another child, not even in passing, not in those late-night talks we used to have when I was a teenager, and she'd tell me about the day I was born, or the way my father had cried when he first held me. Nothing. I wanted to believe there was an explanation. Maybe Ella hadn't survived. Maybe it was some clerical mistake. But deep down, something cold and certain settled in my chest, a knowing that this was no accident. I spent that night at the kitchen table, with the file spread open, surrounded by coffee cups and half-crumbled tissues. Daniel came home from work late. He said there'd been an emergency client meeting, and I barely noticed the sound of the door closing. He walked over, kissed my cheek, and frowned when he saw the mess of papers. "What's all this?" he asked. I swallowed hard. "Apparently, I had a sister." He blinked, confused. "Had? I don't know," I said quietly. "A twin. Her name was Ella Rose. I just found the papers." He stared at me for a long moment, his face unreadable, before he finally said, wow, that's something. That word stuck with me. Not shocking, not amazing, not impossible, just something. He didn't ask to see the file, didn't press for details. Instead, he rubbed my shoulders, told me not to stress, and went upstairs to shower. At the time, I thought maybe he was just trying to give me space, but later, when I replayed that moment over and over in my head, I realized something else. Daniel already looked uneasy, like a man who had just heard a name he wasn't supposed to hear. In the days that followed, I became consumed by the idea of finding her, my sister, my twin, the other half I never knew I was missing. I contacted the adoption agency listed in the file, but they told me records from that year were sealed. Still, I wasn't ready to give up. I posted on online forums, reached out to local churches, even emailed a private investigator who specialized in family reunions. Meanwhile, Daniel grew distant. He'd always been affectionate, hand on my waist while cooking, goodnight kisses before bed. But now, there was a gap between us. He stayed later at work, kept his phone face down, and seemed distracted even when he was home. I told myself it was just stress, that maybe the search for my twin was making him feel unsettled too. But one night, about a week later, I was sitting in bed when I noticed he'd left his laptop open on the dresser. I shouldn't have looked, I know that. But something inside me whispered that I needed to. There was an email open, half-written, unsent. The subject line read, "Ella, we need to talk before she finds out." My vision blurred. I remember whispering the words out loud, as if saying them might make them make sense. Before she finds out. My mind went blank. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe. I shut the laptop quietly, crawled under the covers, and lay there in the dark next to the man I thought I knew, listening to the sound of his even breathing, wondering who she was. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence. There were thousands of Ellas in the world. Maybe it was work-related. Maybe I was overreacting. But the next morning, Daniel left early for a business trip. He didn't say where, and when I looked up his calendar, something I'd never done before, I noticed he'd deleted the entire week's schedule. That's when the first real fear crept in. Not the fear of losing him, but the fear of what I might find if I kept digging. Over the next few days, I tried to act normal. I went to work, called friends, smiled when the nurses cracked jokes during lunch breaks, but every night, when the house was silent and empty, I stared at the email in my mind and thought of that name. name, Ella, the name that was supposed to be part of me, the name that suddenly felt like a shadow over everything I loved. I didn't sleep that night, or the one after. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her name glowing on that laptop screen. Ella, we need to talk before she finds out. Before I find out. It was like a riddle that kept replaying in my head. What did Daniel know? Who was Ella to him? And why did I have this sinking feeling that the answer would tear everything apart? By the third morning, I decided I couldn't sit in silence any longer. I went back to my mother's attic, digging through every box, every envelope, hoping to find more clues. And there it was, tucked between two photo albums wrapped in plastic. A small letter, folded so many times the paper had softened at the creases. The handwriting was my mother's. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but the first line made my heart stop. If you're reading this, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I did what I thought was best. Her words trembled across the page. She explained that after giving birth to twins, the doctors warned her that one baby, Ella, had a heart defect. My parents were struggling financially then, and adoption seemed like the only way to give both babies a chance. We thought we'd never see her again, she wrote, but I prayed you two would meet someday. That prayer echoed like a prophecy. The letter didn't say where Ella was adopted, but it mentioned the agency name again, South Carolina Family Services, and a handwritten note. New name changed upon adoption check sealed record number 0487R. I folded the letter back carefully, hands shaking. My mother had carried this secret for decades, and Daniel somehow knew the name I'd only just discovered. I couldn't keep pretending this was a coincidence. That evening, I sat by the window with my laptop and typed Ella Rose Morgan into every search bar I could think of. Facebook, ancestry websites, local databases. For hours, nothing came up. But then, a comment on a genealogy forum caught my eye. A woman named Ella Ross had replied to someone's post about adoption records in Charleston. Her message was brief. I was born in 1987, twin birth. Searching for biological family, my mother's name may have been Margaret Morgan. I froze. It wasn't just the year or my mother's name, it was her face. Her profile picture showed a woman who looked exactly like me. Not similar, not kind of alike. Identical. Same eyes, same smile. Even the same tiny scar above the right eyebrow I'd gotten as a kid from falling off my bike. My hands went cold. For a long moment, I couldn't move. It was like staring into a mirror that knew more about me than I did. I clicked on her page. It was mostly private, but I could see a few public posts, travel photos, a small town event, a wedding picture. My heart stuttered. In the photo, she stood in a white lace gown, smiling at the man holding her hand. And that man, the one looking at her with that same crooked smile he used to give me, was Daniel. I don't remember how long I sat there staring at the screen. The world went quiet. My pulse drowned out every sound. My throat went dry. He'd married her, my twin sister, under another name. I zoomed in on the photo, hoping my eyes were playing tricks, but there was no denying it. The way his hand rested on her waist, the shape of his face, the dimple near his left cheek. It was him. And the date on the post was 4 years before he met me. That night, I waited for him to come home. When he finally walked in, the smell of cologne and cool evening air followed him. He smiled like always, placed his briefcase on the counter, and said, "You're still up, sweetheart?" I could barely form words. "I need to ask you something," I whispered. He nodded slowly, sensing something was off. "Okay, what's going on?" I turned the laptop toward him. The screen glowed in the dim light. The wedding photo, open and unmistakable. His face changed instantly. Not confusion, not guilt, just fear. "Who is she, Daniel?" I asked. "Who is Ella Ross?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the photo like it might disappear if he blinked hard enough. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "Emma, it's not what it looks like." I laughed. A hollow, broken sound. "It looks like my husband married my twin sister." He took a step toward me. "You don't understand." I didn't know at first. "At first?" I snapped. "At first?" He rubbed his temples, pacing. "When I met you, I didn't know she was your sister. I swear. I met Ella years ago. We were young. She left suddenly. No explanations. We lost contact. Then years later, I met you. I had no idea. Until when?" I demanded. "When did you find out?" He hesitated. That hesitation was an answer all on its own. "Last year," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. "She reached out. She told me the truth, that you were her twin. She begged me not to tell you. Said it would ruin everything. I felt my knees weaken. I grabbed the edge of the counter just to stay upright. She begged you not to tell me," I repeated numbly. "And you agreed." He looked at me helplessly. "I was trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I said, shaking my head. "You were protecting yourself." The silence that followed was deafening. I walked past him, into the hallway, and closed the bedroom door behind me. On the other side, I heard him whisper my name once, soft, broken, but I didn't answer. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the lies that had built the life I thought I knew. My twin sister, my husband, two people who had shared the most intimate parts of my heart, connected by a secret I was never meant to discover. And as the first morning light crept across the room, I made a quiet promise to myself I would find her, not just to demand answers, but to finally understand who I really was in this story I'd never agreed to be part of. It took me 3 days to find her, 3 days of searching through half-locked profiles, online directories, and one painfully awkward call to the adoption agency that refused to release private records. But when I told them my mother was dead and that I had her letter, something changed. The woman on the phone went quiet for a long time before she whispered, "Wait." Minutes later, she came back and said, "There's a file here. Twin birth, 1987. Sealed record 0487R. The other twin's current name is Ella Ross." I closed my eyes, heart racing. "I need to contact her," I said. "I can't give you her number," she replied softly, "but I can forward a message. If she agrees, she'll reach out." So I wrote one, trembling, cautious, full of words that felt both too small and too heavy. "My name is Emma Morgan. I think you may be my twin sister. I just want to talk. No pressure, no blame, just truth." 2 days later, I got an email. Subject: "We need to talk." We met at a cafe, halfway between our towns, a quiet place with soft music and the smell of cinnamon coffee. I got there early. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every time the door opened, I looked up, half hoping, half dreading. And then she walked in. It was like seeing myself step out of another life. She wore her hair loose, same dark waves, same face, but there was a calmness in her that I didn't recognize. She spotted me instantly, froze for a second, then smiled nervously. "Emma?" she said, her voice, my voice. I nodded. "Ella." We both sat, unsure where to start. For a while, we just stared, as if confirming that this was real, that the person sitting across from me wasn't a reflection, but flesh and blood. "I can't believe it," she whispered. "You look exactly like me." I smiled faintly. "You look exactly like me." We laughed then, awkwardly, almost painfully, because it was the only way to keep from crying. Then silence again. She took a deep breath. "So, you found out about the adoption?" "Yes," I said carefully. "About you and Daniel." Her eyes darkened. "I didn't mean for you to find out like that." I swallowed hard. "You've known about me for a year. He's known too. Why didn't either of you tell me?" She looked down, twisting the napkin in her hands. "Because when I found out, it felt like a cruel joke. I thought I'd finally moved on. From him. From that whole part of my life. Then, I learned he'd married you, my twin. I couldn't process it. I didn't want to hurt you." "Hurt me?" I said, my voice breaking. "Ella, he was my husband. You were my sister." You both knew. Tears filled her eyes. "I swear I told him to tell you." I begged him. "But he said you were fragile, that it would destroy you. He said he'd handle it when the time was right." Fragile. That word burned. "I wasn't fragile," I whispered. "I was blind." She reached for my hand, but I pulled it back. "You could have told me yourself." She nodded slowly, guilt flooding her face. "You're right." For a while we sat there, two strangers bound by the same blood, both broken by the same man. Finally I asked, "Do you still love him?" She looked startled. "No," she said firmly. "Whatever I felt for Daniel ended years ago. I left him because I realized he wasn't who I thought he was. He lied even back then." I frowned. "About what?" She hesitated. "About money, about women, about his job. He had this way of making you feel like you were the only one who mattered, until you weren't." That hit like a punch to the chest. "He hasn't changed," I said quietly. She looked at me then, really looked, and said something I'll never forget. "He chooses women who trust too easily. That's his talent." After we said goodbye, I drove home in silence. The truth had set me free, but it also shattered every memory I'd built with him. When I walked through the door, Daniel was waiting at the table. He looked tired, unshaven, desperate. "Where have you been?" he asked. "With Ella," I said. His eyes widened. "You found her?" "Yes," I said, "and she told me everything." He stood up quickly. "Emma, listen." "No," I cut him off. "You listen. You lied to me. You let me build a life with you on secrets. And the worst part is, you didn't even give me the chance to decide for myself." He reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't. I love you," he said quietly. "Then why didn't you trust me with the truth?" He said nothing. That silence, that cowardly silence, told me everything. I walked past him, into our bedroom, and started packing. "Where are you going?" he asked, voice trembling. "I don't know," I said, "but somewhere without lies." He tried to stop me, but this time, I didn't flinch. I looked him dead in the eyes and said, "You married my sister Daniel. You slept beside her, promised her forever, and then did the same to me. You don't get to say you love me." I closed the door behind me before he could answer. For weeks, I stayed at my mother's house, trying to piece myself together. Ella called a few times, gently, carefully, but I couldn't talk yet. I wasn't angry anymore, just numb. Until one morning, she sent me a picture. It was of our mother, young, smiling, holding two newborns wrapped in white blankets. "She loved us both," the message read, "even when the world made her ever choose. That broke something open in me. I realized then that maybe this story wasn't just about betrayal, it was about truth. The truth that love can exist even in mistakes, that family isn't always what you expect, and that sometimes forgiveness isn't for the ones who hurt you, it's for the part of yourself that still believes you deserved it. Months passed. I started over. New apartment, new job, new peace. One afternoon, as I was closing my laptop, I got an email from Ella. I thought you should know, Daniel moved away. I heard he's remarried. Maybe now we can both stop carrying his shadow? I smiled faintly. That night, I opened a new journal, the kind with thick pages and no lines, and wrote one sentence. My sister was my beginning and my ending. The mirror I never knew I needed to see myself clearly, and for the first time in months, I felt whole, not because everything made sense, but because I finally understood that truth, no matter how painful, is always worth finding. Time has a strange way of dulling pain, not erasing it, just softening the edges. The first few months after everything fell apart, I moved like a ghost through my own life. Mornings felt heavy, nights felt too long, but somewhere between heartbreak and silence, I started hearing my own voice again. I rented a small apartment near the lake. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with thin walls and a leaky faucet. But it was mine. I painted the walls cream, filled the kitchen with potted herbs, and started baking again. Not for anyone else, just for me. It's funny how freedom and loneliness can look the same at first. I'd sit by the window at night, watching the streetlights glow on the water, and wonder if Ella was doing the same somewhere else. For weeks, I kept her picture on my table, that cafe photo I'd taken secretly when we met. It reminded me that even in betrayal, there was something sacred about finding her, because no matter how painful it was, she was real, my other half. One evening, as I was folding laundry, my phone buzzed. It was Ella. I hesitated, then answered. "Hey," she said softly. "I didn't know if you'd pick up." "I almost didn't," I admitted, half smiling. There was a pause. "I was wondering if we could meet. Just for coffee. Not about him. Just us." I hesitated again, then said, "Okay." We met the next morning at a small park cafe overlooking the water. It was quiet, a few joggers, the smell of rain in the air. She waved when she saw me. Her eyes were cautious but kind. "You look good," she said. "So do you," I replied. For a while, we just sat there, sipping coffee, listening to the sound of the fountain nearby. Then she said, "I wanted to apologize again. I know words don't fix anything, but—" "They do," I interrupted. "When they're honest." She smiled faintly, relief flickering across her face. "I didn't just lose a husband," I said slowly. "I lost the idea of who I thought I was. The loyal wife, the trusting woman, the person who believed love meant safety." Ella nodded. "And I lost the belief that running from pain could ever make it disappear." We were quiet for a long time after that. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out something wrapped in an old silk scarf. "This was Mom's," she said, handing it to me. It was a small silver locket. Inside were two faded baby photos, one labeled E, the other L. She smiled sadly. "I thought maybe we could share it. You keep it for a while, then I will." I traced the tiny initials with my thumb. "She must have loved us so much to keep this all those years." "She did," Ella said softly. "I like to think she'd be proud we found each other, even if the road was messy." I looked at her then, really looked, and realized that beneath all the pain, there was something unshakable between us. Not perfect, not easy, but real. "I don't want to lose you again," I said quietly. "You won't," she whispered. A few months later, we started seeing each other more often. Dinners, walks, even a short road trip to the small town where our mother grew up. We found the house she once wrote about in her letter, old, weathered, with lilac bushes still growing along the fence. Standing there, side by side, it felt like time folded in on itself, like two halves of a broken story finally touching again. I took a deep breath. "You know," I said, "if things had gone differently, maybe we would have grown up here, shared a room, fought over clothes." Ella smiled wistfully. "Maybe we still can, in a way." We stayed there until the sun dipped low, painting everything gold, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Not the kind that comes from forgetting, but the kind that comes from accepting. As for Daniel, he called me once, months after the divorce papers were finalized. I let it ring twice before answering. "Emma," he said. His voice sounded smaller somehow. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry." "For what exactly?" I asked. "For everything. For lying. For not being brave enough to tell you the truth." I was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you love her?" He hesitated. "No, I don't think I ever truly loved anyone. Not the way I should have." That, somehow, was the most honest thing he'd ever said. "I forgive you," I said finally, "but not for you, for me, because I don't want to carry this anymore." He exhaled shakily. "You always were the better person." "No," I replied, "just the one who learned the harder lesson." And I hung up. That was the last time we spoke. A year later, Ella and I visited our mother's grave together. We brought white roses and the locket, opening it one last time before placing it on the stone. I whispered, "We're okay now, Mom." Ella squeezed my hand. She'd be proud. I looked up at the sky, soft, gray, and endless, and thought about how life has this strange symmetry. The same secret that once tore my world apart had also given me something irreplaceable, my sister. And in that moment, I realized healing isn't about going back to who you were. It's about becoming who you needed all along. These days, I tell my story not with bitterness, but with gratitude, because every lie that broke me also led me closer to the truth. And every piece of myself I thought I'd lost, I found again, one quiet morning, in the reflection of a woman who looked just like me. Now, when people ask if I believe in closure, I tell them this: closure doesn't come from answers. It comes from understanding that even broken stories can end beautifully. Months later, Ella and I started a small bakery together. We named it Twofold. Every morning, we'd bake side by side. Cinnamon rolls, muffins, loaves of bread. We laughed more than we cried. One day, a customer asked, "Are you two sisters?" We smiled at each other and said in unison, "It's complicated, but that's the truth, isn't it? Family always is." That night, after closing the shop, I sat by the window again. Same moonlight, same reflection on the lake, but this time, there was peace. I thought of Daniel somewhere out there, probably chasing another dream, and I thought of my mother, somewhere beyond this world, maybe smiling down at her two daughters, finally standing side by side. I whispered into the quiet, "We made it, Mom. Somehow, we made it." And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like half of anything. I felt whole. You know, sometimes life hides the truth from us until we're ready to face it. For years, I thought my pain was punishment, a cruel twist of fate. But looking back now, I see it was preparation. If I hadn't gone searching for my past, I never would have found the piece of myself I didn't know was missing. If I hadn't been betrayed, I wouldn't have learned what real forgiveness looks like. Not the kind you give to others, but the kind you give to yourself. I used to think love meant loyalty. Now, I know it also means honesty, even when it hurts. And family? It's not about shared blood. It's about shared truth. When I met my twin sister, I thought her secret would destroy me. But in the ashes of that heartbreak, I found something stronger than anger: understanding. We were both broken by the same silence. And somehow, we both learned to speak again. So if you're listening to this right now, holding your own kind of hurt, please remember, sometimes the people who wound us aren't villains. They're just lost souls trying to survive their own pain. And healing doesn't mean forgetting what they did. It means remembering who you became after. Because even the most shattered stories can end with grace if you choose to let light in. Tell me, if you were in my place, would you have forgiven her or walked away forever? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. And if my story touched your heart today, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because every story I tell here reminds me, we may be different, but our hearts often break the same way. Until next time, this was my story, and maybe, in some way, it's yours too. Broken Heart Sparkles.